You don't mind if I discuss a few family matters, do you, Carlo, old boy?
No, not at all.
Oh, Alexander, now you're not going to bring up those sordid business matters again, I hope.
Gregory LaCava, he's not a director who lets you see the seams, who lets you see the strings in the way that, say, a Hitchcock does. And this is not to favor one approach to the other, but I think it's a little easier to appreciate a sort of more muscular approach than it is to appreciate something like what LaCava does, which depends so much on what happens before the camera rolls, which creates this illusion of effortless playfulness.
Money, money, money. The Frankenstein monster that destroys souls.
Please don't say anything more about it. You're upsetting Carlo.
Gregory LaCava started in newspaper cartooning, and through that eventually winds up in New York working in the studios for a guy called Raoul Barre with one of the earliest animation studios. At this point, the innovators of early cartooning had been crossovers from the newspaper comic strips, Winsor McCay being probably the most prominent example. Bud Fisher with Mutt and Jeff was a catalyst for Barre moving into animation, and then also a catalyst for William Randolph Hearst, who had at one point both McCay and Fisher in his stable of cartoonists and looked upon their success in moving image cartoons with a great deal of jealousy. And Hearst, having all of these intellectual properties that he was sitting on, Cats and Jammer Kids, Bringing Up Father, Crazy Cat, A.B. the Agent, wanted to essay these into success in moving image cartoons as well. When Randolph Hearst was setting up his International Film Services, which was his cartooning studio that was meant to create these tie-in animated versions of popular strips, he did a lot of headhunting out of Barre's group, which included picking up Gregory LaCava, and brought them over wholesale around 1916 or so. And when LaCava was, I think, 24 years old, he was made head of the entire operation. I think it's worth noting that at this point, we're still not all that terribly far removed from the Fairground and Peep Show and Nickelodeon origins of film distribution and exhibition. And though certainly there has started to be some prestige attached in the mid-teens to filmmaking, this is probably the period where there's the greatest opportunity for social mobility through the filmmaking industry. You have people coming from very, very modest backgrounds, often first-generation immigrants, who are finding their ways pretty quickly to the top echelons of the film industry precisely because there's not an enormous amount of desirability or prestige attached to it at this point, and LaCava is certainly a beneficiary of that mobility that exists. LaCava made the decision that he was going to strike out, go west, and try to launch himself in live-action filmmaking. An early instance of his operation in live-action filmmaking is a 1921 film called His Nibs, starring a comedian called Chick Sale, and becomes pretty quickly a comedy specialist, and that's most of what he's getting tapped for through the 1920s. As regards to why Gregory LaCava might have distinguished himself as a comedy director, first of all, he's coming out of a cartooning background, and it's worth noting that the newspaper comic strip and the motion picture are almost exact contemporaries, and they're really developing their visual language at almost exactly the same time. And obviously, the moving picture has motion to work with, but a lot of the same basic building blocks are shared between the two.
I'll do it, but my heart won't be in it.
Irene, be a good girl and sit up and look at Carlo. You know, it always amuses you. Come on, quick.
The fact that he understands how gags work, the fact that he has a visual imagination, or at least knows how to build a gag visually, that same skill set then can fairly easily, I think, be assayed into doing live-action filmmaking. And it's really with La Cava that W.C. Fields articulates the screen persona that he'll play variations on over the next 15-odd years, which is that of a henpecked husband who is a secret drunk and harbors tremendous resentment towards his wife, towards the world in which he has to function, and towards basically everything. All of that really comes together in the two films that Fields made with La Cava. And it's been said that La Cava did for Fields what Frank Capra did for Harry Langdon, that just as Capra sort of saw and helped to articulate the most vital aspects of Langdon's comic persona, that La Cava explained W.C. Fields to W.C. Fields in a way that no director had successfully done so before. There was definitely an immediate affinity between the two men in terms of their senses of humor, in terms of their interests, which were principally limited to golfing and heavy drinking. And if you were drinking with W.C. Fields, you were in all likelihood a total hellacious, knee-walking, falling down drunk. And this was, I think, a big part of La Cava's sensibility. He was not just an idle tippler. Drinking plays a really very, very vital role in the films. I'm not just thinking of the Fields film, So's Your Old Man. Sort of the climax of the film revolves around Fields' character going on a 3-day bender. But throughout the La Cava filmography, we see drinking playing a really crucial role. And My Man Godfrey, everybody's swilling.
Why don't you stop imitating a gorilla and imitate a man?
You wouldn't know an artist if one came up and bit you.
This family doesn't need any stimulant.
And this goes hand in hand with La Cava's interest in transgressing social boundaries. I think that working these drinking plots into the film was a great way to get that going, to have these sort of heedless, drunken moments that can allow for interplay between classes of people who might not normally be rubbing up against one another. If we look at the handful of films considered the La Cava classics, which would be She Married Her Boss, Stage Door, My Man Godfrey, Fifth Avenue Girl, in all of them, some kind of violation or overstepping of class boundaries is very, very essential. And if we look at other quite interesting La Cava films which aren't held perhaps in exactly the same regard, the same holds true. But he's very far from being any kind of identifiably doctrinaire leftist. For example, in Fifth Avenue Girl, there are more than a few lines that are sort of teeing off on Marxist ideology. More than anything, I think La Cava just finds the idea of social classes deeply funny.
My purpose in coming here tonight was twofold. Firstly, I wanted to aid this young lady. Secondly, I was curious to see how a bunch of empty-headed nitwits conducted themselves. My curiosity is satisfied. I assure you it'll be a pleasure for me to go back to a society of really important people.
What did he call us?
Nitwits!
Nitwits? What are they?
But he definitely takes an enormous delight in how funny and strange it is that there are such things as rich people. Just the exotic plumage of these bizarre creatures is incredibly droll and amusing to him. When we're speculating as to why La Cava returned time and again to these class-based comedies, we can only say that La Cava certainly did come from modest means, that he was of a generation of Hollywood filmmakers for whom this was not unusual, and he was also addressing an audience of the 1930s in the United States, in the depths of the Depression, where issues of class and issues of poverty were perhaps more in the fore of people's minds than they would have been 10 years earlier or 10 years after. He was consistently, during the middle and late 1930s, commercially successful, or at least a break-even proposition. However, he was known for being quite peripatetic. He never, I think, stayed at one studio for more than 3 movies. His longest stint at any one studio was Famous Players Lasky in the 1920s. And because of that, I would have to speculate, he never had the big buildup behind him that some other directors had. Gregory LaCava is in the school of staying out of one's own way and trying to just give time and space to the actors to watch the interplay between performers. In the case of My Man Godfrey, it's a very handsome and lubriciously shot movie, but it's not a movie that's full of kind of lights-out bravura pieces.
Hey, Irene, why the shroud?
Listen, Van Rumpel, just because some people have $1 million doesn't mean they can put their arms around other people.
Brr. Where's the bar?
LaCava certainly seemed to be enormously fond of his actors, and from what documentation we have available and from what we can hear from people who worked with him on set, the feeling was more than mutual. In Stage Door, Andrea Leeds and Ginger Rogers have spoken at some length about the fact that LaCava got this entire large female ensemble cast together and had them essentially living in a situation very much like that in the film, where they're all residing in the same actors' boarding house together, and built up this sense of group interplay and camaraderie and got everybody sort of thinking in this almost team dynamic. And for an actor in studio era Hollywood, this would be a really wonderful and rare opportunity to invent something from the ground up. In the case of My Man Godfrey, if you look at the pivotal scenes in the film, a lot of them just depend on giving the performers time and space to do what they do.
Irene, did you miss Cornelia and me, or just me?
Well, I miss both of you, I guess.
Oh, not just me?
Oh, I may have missed you a little more than I did Cornelia. Why?
Oh, I'm glad, because if you miss Cornelia more, you'd probably miss me less.
Well, that sounds very logical.
That's all I wanted to know. You look so cute in your apron.
I'm not trying to look cute. Molly has a cold, and I'm doubling for her.
The dishwashing scene in the kitchen between Carol Lombard and William Powell is just a matter of staying out of the performer's way and letting this sort of mutual fondness come out and just not overlaying any sort of heavy effect whatsoever. And anything over and above that is, just a little icing on the cake. And he never really tanked through the 1930s. He knew his audience, played to his audience, and was quite successful for a brief but potent period. But he was, I think, quite unusual among successful studio directors during this period in his almost open disdain for scripts and for his ability to rework, rewrite, throw things out, come up with new things on the set. And for as long as LaCava was successful at the box office, he was given an enormous amount of leeway. But as soon as he stumbled, people were much less inclined to pick him back up again. There's a fair amount of documentation about the complete exasperation that producers like Pandro S. Berman, who worked with LaCava many times, David O. Selznick, felt towards this director who, again, because of his indifference to the script or non-reliance on the script, was almost impossible to plan around, which is a producer's absolute nightmare. And when he started to have difficulty in his personal and professional life because of his drinking, there was, I think, not an enormous amount of sympathy because he had caused so many people so many headaches along the way. He was recalled on the set of Stage Door drinking tea laced with gin, and this increasingly became an issue. And he was in and out of sanitariums. He was taking cures, things like this. He was removed from a film called One Touch of Venus, which came out in 1948 by the film's producer, Mary Pickford. And that effectively ended him once and for good. He only lived 4 years after this. He died 9 days shy of his 60th birthday, rather in disrepute. There are stories of him wandering the beach in Malibu, shooting at pigeons with a BB gun. Generally not the way that any of us want to wind up. Eventually, LaCava was evaluated as a sort of middling talent who had maybe 3 or 4 top-notch works and nothing beyond that. And part of that, I think, has to do with the basic conception of the auteur, as it was pushing back against the star system, which then as now very much defined the popular view of what film art was, and a way of elevating the behind-the-scenes author while taking something away from the in-front-of-the-camera talent. And LaCava is an interesting case because his authorship largely rests upon creating a convivial atmosphere for that talent. He makes his performers look very, very good. I think you can say without question that there is a consistent worldview in LaCava's movies, but there is maybe not that strong authorial hand being felt. That being said, it takes an enormous amount of work to create the sense of ease that these movies have. An interesting point of comparison would be Cassavetes, who's always thought of as being sort of the epitome of raw, rough and ready improv films, when in fact the Cassavetes films in the main are heavily, heavily scripted, heavily structured films. Whereas the LaCava films, by all accounts, are much, much less so. Much, much more interplay between the performers, dialogue being just sort of grabbed from overheard conversations and plugged in. And you don't really feel it in the films themselves. You feel that sense of ease and happy, free interplay between the performers, but there's nothing rugged or rough about the films whatsoever. They move along like, an absolute dream.
Forget that you had any trouble. I thought so. Let that be a lesson to you.